Welcome. We have a continuation to what we talked about the other day about the revert of the nerf to Destruction Warlock, with lots of frustrations and annoyances, because this is something that wasn't supposed to happen. This is something that was supposed to be dealt with weeks and weeks ago, perhaps even months ago, so that we wouldn't have gotten in this situation right now. We have to talk about something, because as Dragonflight gets closer, I hear more and more wishes, more and more wish list for Dragonflight, things that we hope are going to make it into the expansion, things that we hope will become better in the next expansion, because after all, we don't have the alpha, we don't have the beta. It's not that we know much of anything about the expansion. We do know about the talent system, sure, but that's about it. You know, what's changing in Mythic Plus, what's changing in balance tuning, what's changing in the end game, what's changing in the open world activities, who knows. So many people have a bunch of wish lists and things they are hoping they will see and find in Dragonflight, and I have to say, I don't agree with most of them. I have been hearing things like, I am wishing for housing. For the 50th time and the 9th expansion in a row, people are still wishing for housing. There are people wishing for better open world activities, better profession system, which Blizzard has previewed to us, better mechanics perhaps in the raid, not as difficult raids as we have gotten this last one in Sepulcher, perhaps a few other things they are wishing. However, there is one thing I am wishing for really hard in the next expansion. My wish for the next expansion is faster balance tuning. Yes, indeed, the revert of the nerfs to Destruction Warlock is what sparked this video, even more than before, more than ever. This is a very current event apt wish to have, because given what we have just seen with the nerfs that are not happening to Destruction, this is going to be the wish of mine for Dragonflight, because we have gone through several expansions. This is a little bit of a boomer bit of info that many of you might not know. This is, of course, a piece of advice that has been given to Blizzard multiple times. Why are you not balancing, changing the power of specs very often? Why do we have to wait, 6 months, 3 months before something changes? One of the answers given, I believe at the time Ion was still already the lead game dev, so perhaps it was Legion already, or maybe it was a little bit further back. However, the answer was that it wasn't going to be good for the players to have this many changes. Their actual response was that, the players, if they log into the game and they very often see that some of their abilities have changed, some of their effects have changed, or their talents are constantly reset because we are rebalancing the talents constantly, this is going to confuse them. This is going to not make them feel up to date with what is happening. It feels too confusing. We don't want to force people to constantly be reading patch notes in the launcher to see what's new every different week. This was their original answer as to why we are not getting such frequent set of changes in the game. Not to confuse the general player base. Okay, now it's up to you to define what is the level in the game of this general player base. If it's just battle pet masters or transmog run experts, or perhaps some role players. Anyways, it is quite the depressing point if you're trying to get into any content at any level of competitiveness, whether you think plus 15s are competitive, plus 20, plus 25 keys in Mythic Plus, whether you think getting top 200 in the world in Mythic Progression is competitive, or just getting cutting edge at the end of every tier is competitive, or just clearing heroic and getting your ahead of the curve is competitive. Any one of this group of people is not what Blizzard means when they talk about players getting confused by frequent changes, which is why is what I hope that we change significantly in the next expansion, because this could fix a lot of frustration towards the meta that we have every season. Whenever the player base realizes what's what, whenever they realizes who is meta, who is OP, who gets invited in Mythic Plus keys, who do we have to stack in the raid, that's usually how it stays for a lot of time, for quite a few months before Blizzard even touches them. Very often we have tried to find some copium excuses, like, oh well, it's the race to world first. Blizzard can't fix anything right now, or it would impact the race to world first, obviously. Well, okay, hold on. It's still very deep into progression for all of the guilds into the race for Hall of Fame. We can't balance everything now when the Hall of Fame race is still going. Well, hold on. Now it's getting late. We are getting into the MDI. We are getting into the end of the season. Players are pushing for their titles in Mythic Plus or in Arena. We can't really change things now. So in the end, you get a few windows of reliable room for fixes, for nerfs and buffs, etc., which is usually like 1.5 to 2 months into the patch. 6 to 8 resets into the patch is when we can get an excuse, we can get a reasonable time for most patches to balance stuff to happen without annoying too many players, right? However, I still think we need to as a community get together and try to agree with some more room for balancing, some more windows to change things, because I don't believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't believe this is happening often enough. Let's just go a trip down memory lane for this expansion, starting with Season 1. Season 1, we had the range DPS, and the meta for the range DPS was Ballast Druid, Fire Mage, and Marksmanship Hunter. The melee DPS in Season 1 was either Rogue, Arms, Windwalker, or Havoc. Generally speaking, your end game top pushing group was going to have a Ballast Druid always, a Fire Mage always, and then 1/3 extra DPS, which could have been any of these 4 melee DPS. Usually a Rogue. That was how it was. And then you had the split in the healers, which was either Shaman or Paladin, and for tanks it was mostly just Vengeance. Season 2 kind of went back to the roots of Mythic Plus, because it was just Frost Mage, the main pick in Mythic Plus, while Windwalker and Rogue were making up the other 2 spots in very high Mythic Plus keys and part of the meta. For healers, it was once again Paladin and Resto Shaman, and for tanks, this time around it was Guardian Druid. Guardian Druid, to be fair, was towards the end of Season 2, not at the start. It was like a ramping thing for Guardian Druid, but still it was not as one-sided as the season previous, the Vengeance season, and this season, the Blood Death Knight season. Because if we go into this season, this is the power of Blood Death Knight, and this is not like Guardian Druid in Season 2. It hasn't risen over time. This is basically how it's been since Blood got their hands on their tier set and their double legendary. Same goes for healers. The main change for healers is the complete drop out of the scene of Holy Paladin after the multiple nerfs to their Ventier damage. Now Holy Paladin has basically been overtaken by Holy Priest. And then for DPS, of course, we have the 2 picks, the duo of Survival for melee and Destruction for ranged. And that's pretty much the 2 locked spots for Mythic Plus. Now, across these windows of time, the question would be, wasn't there a period where buffs or nerfs could have happened? Let's go back to Season 1, let's go back to Vengeance. Why was Vengeance nerfed so heavily and so late down in Season 1? So that once we get into Season 2, Vengeance has completely lost its advantage. Wasn't it better to nerf Vengeance halfway through Season 1 at a decent rate and keep it viable throughout the season, rather than having to stay in this one-sided dominance of Vengeance and then have Vengeance basically drop off in Season 2? Same question would be said for Holy Paladin. Blizzard tried over and over again to nerf the damage of Ventier Holy Paladin. They weren't able to, and then they weren't able to until they said, fuck this, go play Necrolord and get out of our Mythic Plus keys. Again, wasn't it better to just nerf it in Season 1 to not be as oppressive but still be viable, rather than what we have gotten now? Wouldn't it have been more healthy for all of the other healers as well, who could have gotten more room to play, rather than being strangled by Holy Paladin in Season 2 and in Season 1 as well? That's the question. I wish that this is not going to repeat itself in Dragonflight, that these type of tuning to these clearly overperforming specs, okay? I'm talking about the very obviously top specs. I still think that this needs to happen way more often, that we cannot still have these situations that go untreated for months and months and months. Perhaps this was like the last straw, the last step towards getting a fatigue towards this system, because in Season 1 it was somewhat bearable. Season 2 you had Frost Mage growing a lot, but in melee DPS as well it wasn't as one-sided either. But then you go into this season and you're like, okay, I can't excuse this anymore, I can't explain this anymore. Why is it allowed to stay like this for 4 months, basically? My main wish is that we're not going to have a repeat of this in Dragonflight, that the frequency of balance tuning is much higher in Dragonflight. And I'm not some hopium swindler, by the way. I'm not one of those pointless comments whenever there is talk about balance, saying, you shouldn't nerf the OP spec, you should buff everyone to the same level. I still understand, despite thinking that this is an abomination and should never be allowed, I'm still not talking about nerfing destruction to make every other spec at the same level. I still know when I'm talking about Season 1 and saying that fire and balance should have been nerfed much earlier on, I still know that this is not going to make all of the other specs viable. I still know that nerfing fire and nerfing balance isn't going to make Shadow Priest, Beast Mastery, Arcane, and Demonology suddenly viable. Okay? I'm just saying, perhaps we could go, maybe I'm asking too much, but we could go from 1 to 2 specs being the 2 go picks to 4 to 5 in each of the DPS roles. This would still mean that half, or more than half, of the entire roster is terrible, okay? But at the very least, there would be more variety. You would shake things up a little bit more. There are plenty of complaints very often whenever this happens about players saying, but what about the time I have spent? You know, if we get more balance tuning, doesn't this mean that everyone is now at more risk of losing the power they have just spent time in? You know, if that is something that we have to come to an agreement as a community, because what happens if Dragonflight launches, you are into the beta, you are watching my videos, and I'm telling you, you know what, this Season 1 is the season of Shadow Priest and Elemental Shaman. You follow the Flavor of the Month prediction, you reroll to Shadow Priest, you reroll to Elemental Shaman, who by the way have no alternatives if they get gutted. They're not a Warlock, they're not a Hunter, they're not a Mage, they don't have a counterpart in their role, in their ranged role. So you go in, you get to max level, you do all your Mythic Zeros, all your rounds of first Mythic plus spam, whatnot, the raid starts, and then you get gutted. And now your Flavor of the Month state is now middle of the pack to bottom of the pack. More balance tuning also means this. More balance tuning will also mean that more and more players who will have rolled a certain character thinking it was going to be strong, they will end up screwed, essentially. There is no other way around it, you know. That is the risk. That is the risk of trying to keep more spec balanced and even at the same time, that you need to balance them as a result, which means some of the specs that you will be playing will get nerfed as a result, and some of the specs that you weren't playing suddenly out of nowhere get balanced to be buffed. So perhaps to many players the frustration of seeing Destruction Warlock this high and basically being cut off high Mythic Plus progression if you are a Shadow Priest, for example, perhaps that frustration would be the same. The level of frustration you would have would be the same if you first played a Destrolock and then you were nerfed. So you rerolled to Shadow Priest, and then Shadow Priest went up to be buffed, and then 2 months later we got nerfed as well, so now you have to reroll back to the Balanced Druid. Perhaps this level of frustration could be the same in the end of the level of frustration that we have now from players who are not Destruction Warlock or Survival Hunters or Blood Death Knights, for example. It might be the same thing, okay? It's why I'm giving out this warning. I am aware of this. I am aware of this when I say I wish we get more balance tuning. I'm just saying, for everyone who is also wishing the same, please know that if we get more balance tuning more often, if we get a much more even state, we are bound to get way more specs suddenly drop in and out of the meta, become Flavor of the Month in the actual meaning of the word. Month. Not Flavor of the Season, but Flavor of the until Blizzard nerfs them type of duration. So, just so you know, when you're wishing, like me, to get more balance tuning, to get much more even specs across the board throughout an entire season in Dragonflight, it might also mean you might have to be much less attached to a single character that you have gotten previously. That would be the result. Obviously, next to the wish of having more balance tuning happening more often in Dragonflight, there is of course the wish of having more alt friendliness, because those two are going to go hand in hand. If we say that our wish comes true and we have much more balance tuning much more often, Blizzard will not allow certain specs to reign uncontested for months and months. As a result, having more alt friendliness, having an easier time to bring in up character and to keep character up to date, up to, you know, max level competitiveness, making it easier will also make it easier for you to wiggle around the different characters depending on whether or not they're getting buffed or nerfed or gutted or turned into flavor of the month. That is also the next wish I would have in Dragonflight. If the first wish comes through, I'm going to be very selfish. I'm going to ask for a second wish. So if the first wish of the more often happening of balancing comes through, then the second wish of a much easier alt friendliness requirement would also have to come, you know. Otherwise it might seriously turn out to be even worse. Imagine if Blizzard were to quickly balance specs over and over to make it as even as possible, but at the same time the struggle, the grind to level up and catch up with your alts is as bad as at the start of Shadowlands, with all of the renown limitations, anima grinding limitation for Covenant, Sanctums, etc, etc. You know, that would perhaps make it even worse than having a single super meta spec for an entire season. Because at the very least, in this situation, you know you're doomed. If you're not a Destrolock and you're arranged, you know you're doomed in Mythic Plus for the entire season. You don't get frustrated, you just get defeated and depressed, but at least you know your situation. It would be perhaps better than knowing you can make things better by changing your spec and class, knowing that Blizzard is balancing very often, but the bringing up of the characters is a mind-breakingly boring chore that perhaps might be even more frustrating. So these would be my wishes for Dragonflight. I am willing to listen to your wishes, just please do not type down that you wish for housing. I cannot read it one more time. Thank you. With this being said, thank you guys for watching the video and for helping to grow and support the channel. This can be done, of course, further by liking on the video as well as commenting down below. As usual, not knowing what to write is not really an excuse, because you can just roll your face down the keyboard and type whatever you entered. Also, as a further notion, I am available to be followed but not stalked on Twitter down in this direction, and you can also support me even more by subscribing to my Patreon down in this direction, which will also give you access to my Discord channel. With that being said, we can leave each other because it's getting really hot in front of these lights in the summer with long hair and with a growing beard as well. This is starting to become an issue. Thank you guys again. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, yeah, it says 25 degrees, but it must be like probably 42 perceived inside of here. Jesus.